everyone, welcome. Just letting people in. It'll just be a minute. Come on in, make yourselves comfortable in our virtual room. Feel free to have your video on if you want. We like to see your faces, but no pressure. Totally up to you. Great. Well, welcome everyone. I'm so happy to see those of you that I can see, and everyone else. I'm happy to feel your presence in our virtual room tonight. My name is Cecily Cayman. I'm the Public Programs Director of MOFAD, the Museum of Food and Drink. We are based in New York City. We have been doing virtual programs for a very long time. We actually did our first virtual programs with Gastro Obscura almost 2 years ago, right, Dylan?
Yeah, Jesus. That's about right. Yeah.
Right when the pandemic happened, I was like, what is Zoom? And luckily people at Gastro Obscura figured it out. So helped ease us into that transition. And those were great programs that we did together. So it's so nice now, a year and a half later or so, to be with you again in this space and finally be celebrating the long-awaited launch of your book, which we are all here to talk about and celebrate tonight. So this is really great. I just wanted to mention quickly, for those of you that aren't familiar with MOFAD, we are a museum. We were in a physical space for a long time. We've been virtual for a while. We are doing some in-person programs in New York City. We're doing some at the Ace Hotel. If you happen to live near Brooklyn, downtown Brooklyn, or we'll be visiting, we're doing one every month. For the next couple of months, we're doing one on October 21st there. We're gonna start some up at Essex Market in the end of October as well, on the Lower East Side in New York. And then we have a really exciting exhibition that'll be opening in early 2022 at the Africa Center in Harlem. So this is all to say, you should subscribe to our newsletter so you know where to find us and you know about our programs and our upcoming exhibition, because there's a lot going on this year. So we hope you'll join us, and we'll keep doing virtual too, because it's so great to be connecting with all of you who are outside New York City. So I want everyone on our panel tonight to say hello, introduce themselves, and then I will turn it over to them and shut up. So Dylan, why don't you kick us off?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Dylan Thuras. I'm the co-founder and creative director of Atlas Obscura and the co-author of Gastro Obscura, along with Cecily Wong. Cecily.
That's me. I'm Cecily Wong, and I am the other co-author of Gastro Obscura. I'm a writer at Atlas Obscura. We've been working on this awesome book together for about 4 years now, and I'm very excited to share it with you guys tonight.
Thanks, Cecily. And Ursula, why don't you say hello?
Yes, hi everybody. My name is Ursula Jansen, and I am joining you tonight from Bayeux in France, so it's a little late here. And I'm actually at a festival here, so I'm sitting in the breakfast room of my hotel. But I didn't want to miss the opportunity to join this presentation that I was kindly invited to. I am an archaeologist working on culinary history, and that's why I was invited tonight. I think you will hear later more about what I'm doing.
That's right. Ursula is skipping what sounds like maybe a pretty fun party to be here with us. So I really appreciate that.
I'll join later.
Great. Thank you all. And Dylan, Cecily, take it away.
Okay. Well, so we have this book, Gastro Obscura. It's here. Let me start by sharing my screen. That'll be a good place to start. Hang on. Okay, and let's see. Okay, can everyone see that? Thumbs up. Yes. Okay. Good. So here you have in front of you this book that Cecily and I have been working on for the last 4+ years. And we thought, since this book spans basically the entire world and lots of themes and subjects, we would basically take you on a little journey around the world and through the book. Bear with us. This is actually the first time Cecily and we've practiced. It's not that we've never done it. This is our first time really taking this presentation out in front of a live audience. So you'll have to let us know how it goes. But with that, I think we should start our tour. So I grew up as a kid eating this. This is a jar filled with vinegar, sugar, onions, some dill, and a bunch of cut up fish. And it's very, very delicious. And I loved eating it as a kid, and I still love eating it now. Also, as a kid, I grew up in a place where every summer my family would pack up the car and we would go watch people get their heads carved in 90-pound blocks of butter, because these are normal things that normal people do. And I wanted to see if anyone had any guesses, and you could put them in the chat about where I grew up. Here, let's see if I can see the chat here. Okay, right off the bat, Minnesota
Ding,
is
ding,
correct. Ding, ding, ding. That's right. I grew up in Minnesota. My heritage, my family is very Scandinavian, so we ate a lot of pickled herring, lefse, the often maligned lutefisk, and the region was also a big dairy producer. So we went to the Minnesota State Fair every year and saw those butter sculptures. Meanwhile, somewhere else.
I grew up eating this. I like to describe this as a kind of spam sushi. It's essentially spam with rice. It's wrapped in seaweed. And where I'm from, spam musubis, you can find them anywhere. You can buy them at gas stations, at convenience stores. They're essentially like sandwiches. I also grew up eating this salad. My parents referred to this as a salad. I thought this was a salad. It is macaroni in a very heavy mayo dressing, and then you let it sit in the fridge overnight until you can scoop it up. It's delicious. It's not light. It's close to a salad, but not quite. Any guesses where my family is from? We got two. Yes, exactly. I am from Hawaii. My family's from Hawaii. My grandparents came to Hawaii in the early 1900s from China. They've been there ever since. I have 4 grandparents who still live on Oahu. My parents grew up there. I was born there, but I didn't grow up there. I grew up here in the land of pickles, which is Oregon. And so in Oregon, I also had the opportunity, like Dylan, to go on some really dairy heavy vacations. I would go with my family to the Tillamook cheese factory on the Oregon coast. And you essentially just kind of look in these huge windows while people move these massive blocks of cheese around, and they make everything related to dairy, and you eat ice cream at the end. And it's really wonderful.
Cecily, we discovered we shared very dairy-oriented childhoods, the two of us. And another funny thing is, of course, that we both grew up with very, very questionable ideas of what a salad is. Obviously, there's macaroni salad. Minnesota is famous for some of its dessert salads, including something called cookie salad, which is legit just Keebler cookies with buttermilk and pudding and whipped cream, and sometimes there's some light fruit on the top. There's a whole history of dessert salads, but we won't go too far into that. I'm Dylan Thuras, and which you already know.
And I'm Cecily, and that is us looking like authors.
Hello. And we wanted to start this presentation with our own food backgrounds, because in those examples, you can see how much food ties us all to place, to heritage, to history, even at times when we don't realize it. So food can tell you where Cecily and I come from, but it can also bring you to a whole other world, all without sort of ever having to leave your kitchen. And that is pretty much exactly what we hope to do with Gastro Obscura.
Yeah, so Gastro Obscura it's not just a collection of foods. It's also forgotten histories and endangered traditions. There's incredible experiences and lots of culinary ingenuity. And it's this massive book. It's got 500 entries. It spans the entire world. And as often as possible, we try and tell you exactly how and where you could experience all these things for yourself.
To take a step back, this all comes out of a project that I started a little over 10 years ago with my co-founder, Josh, called Atlas Obscura. Basically started as an art project to create this map of the world's incredible places, its hidden wonders, and to foster this kind of sense of community with folks who wanted to travel differently and discover interesting new places. We sort of grew the site over a while. About 4 years ago, 5 years ago now, we published this book, Atlas Obscura. And we told people about places like this, the gates of hell in Turkmenistan, a giant 300-foot burning hole that's been on fire for 50 years and is the result basically of a kind of industrial accident. Or places like this, which is sometimes called it's called the Keshwachaka, or sometimes the last Incan bridge. It actually just collapsed because these haven't been able to be maintained during the pandemic. But normally it is maintained, and it's actually rewoven every single year by the four communities that live here. And it's an example of basically Incan infrastructure, Incan architecture that's active today. But we also wanted to tell people about local wonders. So not just things that were far away, but point out that you could find incredible places in your own backyard. Probably a lot of you recognize this place. This is the Ganesh Temple in Queens. It's incredible, beautiful Hindu temple. But we realized as we sort of did this project that that sense of wonder and surprise could be found really almost wherever you were willing to look for it. And basically one day we looked down and found it sitting right in front of us.
Because literally below the Ganesh temple is an incredible cafeteria that serves almost exclusively South Indian dosas, and they're so, so good. And as you're eating it, you realize that you're taking part in a story around you, and you're learning so much about the temple above and the neighborhood around you and the people who you're eating with. And that's kind of this miraculous thing about food, is that just by eating it, by paying attention, you feel all these stories about where you're sitting.
And so with this idea of sort of taking the sense of local wonder and surprise, we launched Gastro Obscura so that we could basically tell these kinds of stories through the lens of food and drink. And one thing that became really clear as we worked on this was how connected we are by our own personal food traditions to the entire world. That things maybe you think of as something that was just part of your childhood or something you grew up doing really can cut across cultures and entire geographies. So take pickled herring, for example. In Japan, there's shimasaba.
Yep, this is a herring that's pickled and bread in rice wine vinegar and eaten as sushi.
In South and Central America, you've got, you might find a variation on a pescado and escabeche, which is kind of a cousin of ceviche, and it's a pickled fish dish that cuts across Latin America, Spain, the Philippines. Jamaica has a version where it's marinated with Scotch bonnet peppers. And in South Africa, you can find the Cape Malay pickled fish, which is said to have originated with Malaysian fishermen who wanted to preserve the fish as long as possible. And it's since become a very popular South African Easter dish. And I think besides sort of finding these ways in which, parallels in food run around the world, one of the other things that I think both Cecily and I were struck by working on this book was just the ingenuity involved in food. So pickling, for example, but also fermenting, brewing, smoking, drying, in the case of lutefisk, dousing it in lye and then rinsing it out so it doesn't poison you when you eat it. All of it is a kind of magical transmutation. It's a way of taking a piece of food and transforming it into something else. And for so much of the history of food, it was about finding ingenious ways to preserve whatever calories you could. So, blood, worms, fat, eggs of every variety, all of it was valuable. And all of it meant ways of coming up with systems of keeping it edible as long as you could. And I found that every single new dish, every new method, struck me as a kind of bit of brilliance, sometimes devised just to keep people alive, but also often making something really, really delicious in the process.
Exactly. So if we go back to Spam, it is essentially, it's a preservation technique, canning meat. And so that's why Spam came to Hawaii with the Second World War. It came with the soldiers because they needed protein, and Hawaii had limited resources as an island. And so canned meat was a great solution. But since then, Spam has transformed the culture of Hawaii. It's actually just kind of become Hawaiian. Hawaiians eat the most Spam in the world. They eat like 7 million cans of Spam every year, which is like almost 7 cans of Spam per person, which is a lot. And so it's everywhere. And that's also the power of food, is to come to a new place and transform the place. And thank you, Dylan. This is the Spam Jam. This is the largest celebration of Spam in the world. 35,000 attendees come every year to Oahu just to eat Spam in a million ways. Spam fries and Spam pastries. One year they had macadamia nuts with powdered Spam. I've had the pleasure of going to this. It is really excellent.
And this is kind of part of the transmutive or transformative power of food, which is the way in which ingredients sort of crash into a cuisine and then get rolled in. This is another Spam example, and a similar story with Hawaii in a sense, with Buddha jjigae, which is also known as army-based stew. And this has happened during the Korean War, but same story, soldier stationed there. Food shortages for Koreans meant that basically anything people could get their hands on was really valuable. And this included both bartering and scavenging soldiers' leftovers. And what they found was basically Spam, canned beans, cheese, hot dogs, ham, and that was combined with more traditional ingredients like kimchi, vegetables, chili paste, and it created this incredible, delicious stew, which now has sort of been elevated and you can find at very fancy restaurants. But for me, it's just another example of the way in which food has this transformative power. And Spam actually connects me, another connection that Cecily and I ran into as we worked on this together. Spam connects me back to my ancestral home of Minnesota, because it was created in the Midwest and we have the Spam Museum there. Even things that I thought of as basically quintessentially Midwestern, like how could this happen anywhere but the Midwest, like butter sculpture carving, I found parallels. This is Tibet's butter sculpture tradition, which goes back actually much farther. And it's created by Tibetan monks for special celebrations and ceremonies. It's made out of yak butter. And they use mineral pigments to essentially do this dyeing. So it's like a whole nother level. It's incredible, colorful quality to it. And then at the end, in sort of classic Buddhist tradition, these are fed back to the livestock. And this, of course, in all these themes that we kept running into and working on this book, this was another one, which is the traditions of monastic cultures. That, these are by no means the only monks making incredible foods. This one's more sort of presentational, but many of the foods are absolutely incredible. And often the monastery or temple is the only place you can find them. They're often in really beautiful settings. And we also found that they will often get you incredibly hammered.
Yes, we found a lot of monks making alcohol. Here is an example. This is Lindisfarne Island. It's also known as Holy Island because it was once home to an order of medieval monks who made some really excellent mead. And mead itself has a holy history. The ancient Greeks used to call it the nectar of the gods. And it's on this incredible island. It's not only super gorgeous, it's a tidal island. So you can only cross to this island twice a day during low tide, which is very convenient if you miss the tide out and you just have to stay and drink more mead.
Worse fates than that. You can also travel not super far and actually to the country that Ursula is in right now, because if you really want to go for it, then you're going to want to go find the Carthusian monks who make a drink that probably many of you have had, Chartreuse. So the story of Chartreuse is pretty wild, considering it's something you can actually buy at a liquor store. Basically, in 1084, the group of monks, silent monks called the Carthusians, were formed. And in the 1600s, as a kind of thanks for their work, they'd grown into a powerful order. They were given an ancient alchemical manuscript for an elixir that would supposedly prolong life. But they looked at the document and they basically were like, there's absolutely no way. It called for 130 different plants. It required advanced distillation, infusion, maceration techniques. And basically no one even attempted to make it until 1737. But then eventually they did try to make it. And it was around then that basically the first lone monk delivered the original bottles of this herbal tonic to the surrounding villages via mule. It was 69% alcohol. So people were getting lit. They eventually actually realized that this might be a problem, and they created the milder version called Green Chartreuse, which is what we drink today. That's still 55% alcohol. And they still make this, herbaceous, sweet booze basically the same way. There's two monks, Brother Dom Benoit and Jean-Jacques, who basically are the only two people who know all the ingredients, how to turn them into chartreuse, green chartreuse, and then they put their batches in these huge oak casks that are in the world's longest liquor cellar. So just another example of a kind of incredible monastic tradition.
I can't believe we can buy that commercially.
It seems crazy. It doesn't. Yeah. Anyway,
doesn't make a lot of sense. So for something a little more calming, you might go to have a cup of tea at China's Mount Hua. But okay. So it's not calming at first. First, you have to do this, which is called the Plague Walk. It is the trek up to Mount Hua has been called one of the most dangerous hikes in the world, and it's because of this. You have to shimmy across these little wooden planks in order to get to the top. But once, and if you do, you get to that southern peak, and there's a Taoist temple, and inside the temple is a tea house. And pilgrims have been making their way to this tea house for centuries to have a well-earned cup of tea with a really, really incredible view.
Extremely well-earned cup of tea. In India, there is the Golden Temple, and everyone who arrives at this temple eats for free, which has been happening for over 100 years. And it's a Sikh temple, and it serves between 75,000 and 100,000 free meals a day, which means that just to make the amount of food that is consumed there in a single day, there are multiple rooms basically just dedicated to this process. So in one room, volunteers just sit and chop vegetables. In another room, those vegetables are put into these giant wood-fired vats, and they're stirred with these comically large, they're literally oars that are stirring these vats. And then another room, they make the dal, this lentil curry, and basically they need a hose and 28,000 pounds of lentils every single day just to basically feed 100,000 people a free meal. It's an unbelievable, incredible thing that happens day in and day out.
I love that they use a hose.
Yeah.
So this is a church in Ethiopia. When it was built in the 5th century, a swarm of bees came in and took up residence, and the same colony of bees has been living there ever since, and it's been tended to by a continuous succession of priests. It is one of 3 holy honey churches in the town of Lalibela in Ethiopia. And the city Lalibela is very focused on bees and honey. It's named after King Lalibela, and his name translates to "the bees recognize his sovereignty." And because of the bees in this church and this long history, this honey is considered holy, and it's dispensed by the clergy to treat all sorts of things, skin diseases as serious as leprosy. It's applied topically, or you ingest it for stomach problems, and it's sometimes used to treat psychological problems as well.
And this is another place where the line between sort of the mystic and the masticable, the religious and delicious is very blurry. In fact, this isn't even the only honey that sort of occupies that line. And what we found is actually really there are no lines. Basically, on one hand, you have food, On the other end, you have deadly poison. And somewhere in between is medicines and psychedelic drugs and all of this. So for another example of this, you can go to the hills of Turkey near the Black Sea, where these great fields of rhododendrons grow. And there's like a lot of types of rhododendrons in the world, but these particular types that grow here contain something called granotoxin, which is a neurotoxin. And in any one rhododendron, it's a teeny tiny amount, but basically, taken up by the bees and distilled into the honey, it becomes a very strong psychedelic. And the locals have been cultivating Delhi Ball or mad honey for millennia. This has been going on for a very long time. And in small doses, it doesn't taste very good, actually. It's quite bitter. But in small doses, it's added to, about a teaspoon is added to like a tea, and it helps with hypertension or diabetes. More than a tablespoon more than a tablespoon, you start to run into a real danger of poisoning. And it can vary batch to batch, but overconsumption can lead to nausea and numbness and hallucinations, even death. And because this has been happening so long, this effect has actually been used to kind of incredible purposes, which is all the way back in 67 BC. The Roman Emperor Pompey sent a huge army of Roman soldiers into this area of Turkey to defeat King Mithridates, who was basically refusing to submit to the Roman Empire. And as these Romans marched in, this huge army ready to just sort of go wipe out these rural folks, they found these chunks of honeycomb. And they couldn't resist because they're starving, they're marching and hungry. And so they gorged themselves on these honeycomb chunks. And then shortly after, as they began to sort of lose physical and mental abilities, King Mithridates' army swooped in and basically wiped them all out. It's a sort of a famous sack in Roman history. Another sort of chance where you might mean to have a nice meal and instead have a different kind of experience is with this, Salima porgy. It's a cute little fish. It's like about yay big. It's not very threatening. And it's found across the Mediterranean, and it's eaten particularly in the sort of French Riviera area, in Tunisia. Mostly you just get a nice, delicious meal. Sometimes things go slightly differently. In Arabic, it has a name that translates to the fish that makes dreams. And basically certain fish, certain porgies, based probably on what they eat, we're not 100% sure, but it's probably something in the algae that they're eating, cause very vivid hallucinations, sort of like being on an LSD trip. And every year, there's a couple of tourists in the French Riviera who eat one of these and start absolutely tripping balls. There's an amazing study from 2006 that describes basically this guy seeing giant spiders and not able to go into his car. And to go back to the Romans, they were known actually for using these fish on purpose to cause hallucinations. And they're still used ceremoniously today by Polynesians.
Yeah, in the book, we call that LSD nightmare fish. There are some incredible stories about people thinking they're just getting fish and then getting hit by the LSD effect.
Yeah.
So for a slightly less insane weighted trip, you could try these, which are miracle berries. They look like cranberries. They taste kind of like bland cranberries. But if you eat the flesh and the liquid coats your mouth, they make all sour foods taste sweet. There's a protein in this berry called miraculin, and it binds to your sweet receptors. And when you put something sour in your mouth, they activate, and it just tastes incredibly sweet. I just did this for the first time a couple weeks ago, and I was eating lemons and pickles and goat cheese, and it made everything taste like candy.
There's also kind of like big sugar side to this story, because someone in the 70s, someone tried to actually sort of start commercializing these as a replacement for sugar, and then later had his office burgled, and he said he was being followed, and then the FDA basically banned it as a sugar replacement. It's still classified as a kind of food additive, which makes it really hard to use in certain ways. Yeah, this is also one of the thing people might be familiar with this. There's a kind of evil twin to this called Himena sylvestra, which is an herb. You can get it in capsule form. And it does the exact opposite. If you put the like you take the capsule apart and you put powder on your mouth, again, it does feel like doing drugs, but it's just a tongue drug. It goes away in an hour. It takes the sweetness out of everything you eat. So if you like drink a ginger ale, it basically tastes just like carbonated, like you can kind of taste something, but I tasted maple syrup and it was just like having goo in my mouth. It was horrific. Anyway, I don't know if I recommend that, but it exists. And point being, whether it is sort of dissolving the barrier between eating and tripping, or the way that the introduction of a new ingredient like Spam can transform cuisine from Hawaii to South Korea, or the parallels between butter sculptures in Tibet and Minnesota, food has this incredible ability to create connections and endlessly recombine into new forms. When I was growing up in the 1980s and 90s, there was this idea of sort of fusion cuisine was happening. Wolfgang Puck had this revolutionary cuisine combining Asian and European ingredients and techniques, but it's it really is a sort of ridiculous idea to call a style of food fusion. I mean, you can definitely combine whatever, tacos and bibimbap, and sometimes it's great, but when you look at the history of food, the entire history of food is fusion.
Exactly. So this cake is a great example. This cake, it originated as a German spit cake, which you take a hot spit and you kind of you brush batter onto it so that it creates these layers. And so the Dutch took this recipe with them when they went to Indonesia to look for spices. And while they're in Indonesia, the locals took this recipe and added spices to the batter, and they changed the way they made the layers. They were making them in pans instead of on a spit so that they could make these really ornate kind of designs. And now this cake exists, and it kind of belongs to all three traditions. It's got a German background. It needs butter from the Netherlands. It needs spices from Indonesia, and it kind of, it belongs to all three cultures in their own right.
This is another example of that. In the 1860s, thousands of Koreans moved across the border into Russia. But by the 1930s, basically Joseph Stalin decided that the Koreans they called them an unreliable people, and he forcibly pushed them out and into the very remote parts of Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. And basically they were forced to readapt to local ingredients and food cultures. And this thing that some people call, carrot kimchi, it's called morkovcha, emerged. And it's basically this delicious, quick kimchi. It's spicy, it's very carroty, and it is now like beloved across Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Russia. If you go down to Brighton, you can definitely find yourself some morkovcha.
This is Brazilian sushi. Brazil is home to 1.5 million people of Japanese descent. It's the largest population outside of Japan, and so they have this really amazing sushi culture that is very unique to Brazil. This is a Brazilian hand roll. You can't really tell the scale, but they're enormous. Big. They're really big, and they're filled often with tropical fruits like mangoes and kiwis, along with the fish.
And this is another example. It's similar to the Spam example in a way. It has to do with soldiers, and so GIs are stationed in Okinawa, and there was a craving for tacos. Again, ironically, bringing a different kind of fusion cuisine from America, and then so taco rice was created, Okinawan taco rice, and it's been a huge hit with both Okinawans and Americans. And now, if you go to a Taco Bell in Tokyo, this is what's on the menu.
And then there's this. This is sugo or spaghetti al sugo e berbere from Eritrea. This is essentially, local food meets Italian occupation. It's spaghetti with a tomato sauce, but the tomato sauce has the local spice blend with fenugreek and nigella, and then you take the spaghetti and you eat it with injera, which is the local flatbread, and that's a very popular dish.
And this, of course, is something probably every single one of us has had, which is chicken tikka masala, which is basically made because drunk British people love gravy. There's this huge diaspora from India to the British Isles, And these restaurants would stay open late and serve people leaving the pubs. And it was kind of like a niche that was occupied. But, and they served chicken tikka, which is a much drier dish traditionally. Basically, British people came in and said, I just wish this had gravy. And so some ingenious chef lost to history, although there are some thoughts, they think maybe just took a can of tomato soup and combined it with chicken tikka and essentially created this, what is now a national dish of Britain, chicken tikka masala, and a sort of international dish. You can find it everywhere.
Amazing. Yep. And here's quintessentially Japanese ramen, but the noodles are originally from China. And so this is what we found over and over again throughout the world, is that food, it's borrowing, it's combining, it's transforming. And, even though the reason for these kind of cultural and culinary collisions are really terrible, it's often colonization, or it's war, or it's forced diaspora. Food has this really pretty amazing way of kind of belonging to whoever claims it. And so we found that these dishes, they really end up kind of existing on their own terms.
As I thought about this, and we were talking about this idea of fusion, I kind of came to the conclusion that I don't think it's even the right metaphor, because fusion suggests taking two things, smushing them together and making a single thing, another single thing. And I think that's wrong. I think it's not to be too much of a nerd, but I think like fission is a much better comparison, because fission is one thing smashing into another and a bunch of new things coming out of it. And I think that's exactly what you see when you look at the history of food, the way in which these sort of collisions and combinations, sometimes very violent, happen, but end up creating many new things from the process. And so, whether you are talking about the sourdough library in Belgium, which is basically a zoo for living sourdough cultures, that has 130 different heritage sourdoughs, some of them hundreds, maybe even thousands of years old, whether it's this.
Or this vending machine in Texas that dispenses freshly baked whole pecan pies 24/7.
Or just eating some ice cream topped with Zanzibar spices at this restaurant in Tanzania, this tiny island restaurant. The biggest thing we came to believe is just that this idea of wonder, it can be found wherever you're open to searching for it, and especially sitting right in front of you, waiting to be eaten. So we hope you enjoyed this and invite you to dig in. That is a little tour of Gastro Obscura around the world. And with that, I think I will stop sharing and I will be able to see your faces again. Hello. I'm gonna do one other thing though. So one thing we didn't have in this presentation, but is quite heavily featured in the book, is these ancient recipes, sort of, very long-held traditions going back, like I said, sometimes millennia. We have obviously Chartreuse and Lindisfarne Mead. We have an entry about ancient Persian ice cream, the Sultan's cuisine from the Ottoman Empire, and we have a lovely 2-page spread on Roman fish sauce factories, which produced this incredible, delicious, ubiquitous, very umami flavored sauce called garum. And it just so happens that our guest, Dr. Ursula Jensen, has written a book of that same name, Garum, Recipes from the Past. Hello, Ursula, how are you?
Hi, yes, that's it. I accidentally bought it. How come?
Well played. So maybe you could tell people a little bit about what is in this book, and well, first start there. Yeah. So what is in this book? What's it about?
So actually, I very much like your description of your book when you said that you wanted to create, a book that makes people be able to travel through food without leaving their home or without leaving their kitchen. Well, this is exactly what I'm doing, just that I want people to travel in time without leaving their kitchen. And I see cuisine as a vehicle to transmit history, and the history of ordinary people, of everyday people, as well as, of course, because the further you go back in time, the more you have recipes that are actually upper class. But it always has a very, very strong connotation of social history. So it's a fantastic tool, vehicle, apart from the pleasure of cooking and eating, to also to start to talk about history. So what I did in my book was a little bit well, it's a voyage, a trip from ancient Mesopotamia via classical antiquity, the Middle Eastern Middle Ages, and the European Middle Ages to the Renaissance. And the idea is not only also, of course, to present those recipes, but also to show how different, well, how they have influenced each other. And especially you see that very nicely in the Middle Ages. Now, I was thinking a lot when you talked about fusion foods and how different cultures have influenced each other, that the European medieval cuisine is heavily, heavily influenced by the Middle East. And you yourself also. I didn't want to jump in, but several times I was thinking like I can say something.
Yes, please.
Was when you were talking of the different kind of ceviches, escabeche, and so on. The name escabeche, ceviche, escabeche, ceviche, and also aspic all comes from the same Arabic name of a dish which is al-sigbaj, which is basically a cooked ingredient in a vinegar sauce. This has traveled via Italy and via Andalusia to Europe and spread from, I mean, of course, you have pickled dishes everywhere, but those dishes with those names, they come from the Middle East.
It's surprising how wide a spread of that kind of escabeche or ceviche variety there is. It's like almost you can find it across the entire world, which I thought was fascinating.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I didn't say they all come from one point, because it's an obvious way of making proteins available, more digestible, and to make them more durable as well, of course.
Yeah. How did you get interested in sort of culinary history, culinary archaeology? How'd you end up doing this?
Well, apart from the fact that I like to cook and I like to eat, is I started originally I'm a Near Eastern archaeologist. And I started off with the old Babylonian recipes from the so-called Yale culinary tablets. They're called like that because, well, they're in Yale. And they come actually, unfortunately, from an illegal excavation. So nobody knows exactly where they're from. But you can see, I mean, they're, clay tablets written in cuneiform. And it's the first known collection of recipes. And this is, and from the style and from the writing, from the language, you can see that they come from southern Babylonia, what is now southern Iraq, around 1800, 1700 BC.
And what do those recipes look like? What do they sound like?
Yes, I mean, as all ancient recipes, they're very short. Actually, the further you go back in time, the more basic, the shorter the recipes become, in a way that actually they are just hints to the cook who knows the dish already, because it never talks of amounts, it never talks of the actual cooking methods. And so it's more a list of ingredients, basically, with maybe a short sentence, then you grill this or something, but it's very basic. So this is why, on the one hand, you have to you have to figure out how to do it. You have to interpret it, which I actually like, because it gives you the chance to be creative, and it also gives you the chance to do it in the way that we, with our actual modern tastes, would like it. Because that is one of the things I do basically within culinary history. There are two main branches. They are the ones that want everything to be as precise, exact as possible, authentic as possible. And I think actually this is not possible because all the ingredients have changed. I mean, we don't know so much. We don't know many ingredients. We do not get some of the ingredients. Some of the ingredients we would not eat anymore because they are protected species or they are extinct. But also the ingredients that we do still have, they have changed so much. We wouldn't recognize many of those vegetables 2,000 years ago. And I mean, I remember aubergines, eggplants, they have actually changed in my lifetime. When I was a child, we had to always put salt and left them. You can still do that, but you don't need to do them anymore because they got all the bitterness out. So imagine what the same kind of vegetable was 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago. So I think we have to take those recipes, take them and interpret them, make them in a way also that we would like to eat them, but still be aware of that fact.
I still salt my eggplants. My wife is like, you don't need to. I still do it. I like grew up, I don't know. Yeah.
It depends on the recipe. Yeah. But I mean, it might be necessary to take out the humidity, but for bitterness, it's not necessary anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to encourage people. We only have about 10 minutes left. So if people have questions, they should feel free to drop them in the chat and they could just address them to whoever you want to answer them, or they can be general for any and all of us. Ursula, I have a question for you, which is there a ancient recipe, a historical recipe that you really found you loved, that you like cooked, tried to make a version of? And granting that it's probably different, a little bit different from what would have it tasted like then, but is there something that you were just like, this is absolutely delicious?
Oh, there are several. I mean, I wrote 2 ancient cookbooks so far, and I tested all of these recipes out with my family. And with my daughter, medieval is actually most popular, because with ancient Roman cuisine, at some point, my family started to say no more fish sauce pasta.
They really like the fish sauce. It shows up in like basically every recipe. It's like
every recipe. Although actually for the late antique recipes, it's very possible that it just meant broth. So I started to replace that in some recipes with
very
broth.
Different.
Yeah,
I would think that you would have a different profile between broth and fish sauce.
Yeah, completely. I mean, that's always the problem. I mean, we are talking of a language that was actively used for, well, it still exists. I mean, Latin was written much longer, but still, if we only talk of classical antiquity, it's basically 1,000 years. So a word can mean something different around 1 AD, then it means 500 years later.
Do you have a concept of how different the Roman garum tastes from what we know of it as fish sauce right now, like the Southeast Asian fish sauce?
Yeah.
Or
apparently it's quite similar. What I usually use is colatura di alici. That's a product that is still made around Naples in Italy, and this is very close. If it's a little hard to say because we're talking basically of the difference I see between the Asian fish sauces and the colatura di alice is in concentration. Like the Italian one is much more saltier and more concentrated. You can't deduct that from residues, how concentrated something was. Anyways, we know that there were also different qualities of fish sauce in ancient times, and I think the range was from terrible to very good. I mean,
yes. Do you have anything? Are you working on any more kind of ancient historical cookbooks coming up? Any other regions or periods of history that you're excited to explore?
At the moment, actually, I'm working on another historical novel. That's something completely different.
I wanted to ask you about this actually. So you do these cookbooks, but you also do both nonfiction and sort of historical fiction. How much does your food research show up in your historical fiction?
Not extremely much, of course, but as I'm very meticulous about historical facts, also in my novels. If food comes up, then it's precise. It actually, no, I have one, my latest one, Rebellion, which is actually, it plays in Bronze Age Spain. And there's quite, because it's about the downfall of a civilization that is often named the first state of Western Europe. And it's about famine, it's about inequality. So food features actually a lot in there. And it's all based on the actual recent archaeological excavations.
That's really
Amazing.
interesting. That's awesome. Someone dropped a question in here that asked, can you discuss a bit about the process of how you decided what to include in the book? That actually could be for any of us, but Cecily, why don't we go first, and then Ursula, you can talk about what you included in your recipe book. So the process for both the Atlas book and the Gastro book is an unusual process, and it's one that takes a long time because we started both projects online and let people basically make suggestions. And then we have editors who basically fact check and research. And so we built a kind of database of both locations and recipes and ingredients. As part of that process, we were also doing original reporting through that. And so we had a kind of big pool of material to work from. And then Cecily and I basically sat down and started just like going through it all and mapping it to the world. And some of it was trying to find things, it's funny because the criteria is not actually find the most obscure thing possible. Like, because that actually results in sort of, what you want is things with great stories. So like things that are not obscure at all are in the book. Like pad thai is in the book because of its origin story, which not a lot of people know, but it was kind of a dish that was like forced upon Thailand by the sort of autocratic dictator at the time, our prime minister. But he also sort of helped found the modern country of Thailand. And so like that's an interesting story that we thought was just as good as other stuff. I don't know, Cecily, yeah, maybe you can talk about how you chose things.
Totally. No, I think the stories were exactly right. And that was kind of one of the more fun parts of the job, was stumbling upon things that we eat every day and not knowing their histories. And so, you're not going to find pineapples in the database, they're everywhere, but we wanted a place where we could put this bonkers pineapple story, which is that they were extremely fancy and expensive when they were first introduced to England in the 16th and 17th centuries. And they were so expensive and unattainable and such a status symbol that people would rent them for their parties as a centerpiece. And then they would return them, and whoever owned the pineapple would then sell it to someone who was way richer than you are.
It cost so much money. They were so excited. Like a pineapple, it was like hundreds of dollars to rent it for a night and thousands of dollars to like get it to eat it for your party. It was crazy.
Yeah, no, wow. I think it's like an 18th century pineapple was like $8,000 in today's money to buy and actually eat. And so these were the stories that I just like fell in love with, and we found a way, to get them into this book. But there's also, plenty of things that you can actually eat a pineapple, but there are things that are far more obscure than that came from user submission, people who are living in Asia, in Africa, in places that we didn't actually get to travel to ourselves, and telling us this is an amazing dish and you should look into it. And so we found probably half the dishes and foods and traditions that way, and then Dylan and I probably found the other half. So it was kind of a collaborative process.
Yeah. Someone asked what is a food included that we've never tried. It's top of our list. It's an interesting, so there are some foods that are so sort of regionally specific that like without really being there, you're going to have a lot of trouble finding a good version of it. I got kind of obsessed with eating this thing called itza pie. It's spelled with a Q. It's a Palestinian dish. It's basically made out of black sesame and nigella seeds, and it's made into this kind of paste, and it's supposed to have this very kind of like bitter, minty flavor. People are sort of either really into it or they really don't like it. It's very stark looking. It looks basically like oil. It's like black. And people bake it into a semolina pie. And for whatever reason, that food, like, just, I like keep thinking about it. I'm like, I really need to know what this tastes like. Something about its description just like absolutely like captured me. So you definitely left, both Cecily and I think left the book with like a long list of like foods that we're still like waiting to go and actually get to try. But some of the stuff you can also make at home. There's a bunch of stuff in the book that's like not super complicated. You know, you can make morchovka at home, no problem. That's like an easy, like kind of great dish to whip up. How about you, Cecily?
It's been really fun thinking about in like a tangible way what I would love to do. But I've become kind of obsessed with this sandwich in Porto. I think it's pronounced Francesina, but it's essentially, it's like the Portuguese response to a croque monsieur, except for it's got tons of meat and it's covered in sauce and cheese, and there's French fries all around it. And the history behind this is that it was once considered so decadent that women weren't allowed to order it. And so I would, I have to eat the sandwich now. Like I have to eat the whole thing.
Ursula, how about you? Is there a dish you're either dying to make or something that you just wish you had a time machine so you could go back and try in its like original form?
Wow. Yeah. I mean, of course, I wish I had a time machine. I'm an archaeologist, and to choose a single dish is really hard. I think still probably I would love to go back to ancient Rome to see exactly those taste blends, how they really were, how it really tasted. Because for the later recipes, medieval, Renaissance, we know quite well what it really is. And actually then when you have the very early recipes, you talk of ancient Babylonian stuff, it would be also interesting, but they're a little less complex, because they had much less of a trade network. While in Roman times, you really have already kind of oriental spices, of exotic spices coming in. So it's much more complex. And as we don't have any quantities, it would be nice to see how much they really use them. Of course, not everybody could afford them. Again, same game. We are talking of different social groups there, but also these things, who used what exactly, that would be actually really interesting.
I'd like to go with you.
Cool, let's go.
Time machine for 3, please.
Yeah, I think there are a couple more questions, and I think probably then we'll be at time. This is probably a question best directed at you, Ursula, which is, what culture in your mind has the most unbroken culinary history, basically to draw a line from hundreds or thousands of years back?
I mean, as I have been concentrating so far on old world recipe, I'm talking mainly of Europe, the Mediterranean region, Northern Africa, and the Middle East. Of course, the importation of foods from the America have changed the food culture everywhere a lot. I mean, we are talking of times where there was no potato, no tomato, no maize, no pumpkins, no beans except the fava bean. What else? No zucchini, no chilies. I mean, can you imagine an Indian cuisine without chilies? It existed. And so, yes, they have changed everywhere. I think, I have quite a strong connection to Iran, as my husband is Iranian. And I see Nazli rejoicing. And I must say, with many of these medieval, but even of the ancient dishes, I'm quite reminded of Persian, Iranian recipes that I know. I think there's a very, very strong tradition, apart from, of course, the potato tomato thing. Yeah
that seems right, based on like some of the stuff that we came across in our writing too.
Right.
That's really interesting. And there's a question that I don't know the answer to at all, which is whether it's true that the food we eat is more intense than previous generations because of food additives. I wouldn't even know how to start to answer that question, because
It depends on it depends on the food that we eat. I mean, because the way I live on a southern Italian farm, and everything is super locally produced. I don't eat food additives. I don't know.
I'm sure some stuff in previous times was very intense, and we wouldn't like the taste because the spices. I know there are times when spices were used in a heavy way that we would find really like overwhelming. But I'm sure
more bitter spices like rue, for example. They liked a lot in ancient times, and nowadays it's mainly only used for herbal liquors, for digestives, and not in food anymore. And this has quite as an example, yeah. Because also, I haven't mentioned that yet. What is very common for all recipes, since classical antiquity until well into the Renaissance, is that what was considered a healthy food was a balanced food in terms of tastes. So if you combined the sour, the bitter, the salty, and the sweet, it was considered balanced. And this is something that comes from the humoral theory. And this is why we have a lot of sweet and sour dishes, actually, that nowadays in many parts have a little bit been lost, but that you still find a lot actually in the Middle East and North Africa, and also in Iran.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Well, thank you everyone for coming on this trip, both around the world and through time with us. This is a really, really fun conversation. Ursula, thank you so much for joining us. I love talking to you about all of that. And
thank you very much for inviting me.
If you found this interesting, check out the Gastro Obscura book, as well as Garum. And yeah, thanks for having us, MOFAD. Thanks. Sorry, this has been really great.
Thank you, Dylan. Thank you, Cecily. This was so much fun. Congratulations on the book. I know I saw someone write, like, I just can't wait to get my hands on it, and I feel the exact same way. I did drop the link in the chat if you want to order it from our partner bookstore, Kitchen Arts and Letters, a wonderful bookstore dedicated to books about food in New York City. I'm sure there's lots of places you can find it. And the on sale date is actually October 12th. So if you ordered it online already, they're not allowed to ship it until the 12th. So that's why it hasn't come yet, but it'll come there soon. And Ursula, wow, what an amazing opportunity to get to learn so much from you. And you're such a trooper for staying up so late. So I hope you are gonna either get some rest or go have a lot of fun.
I'll join the party now.
Yeah, good party.
Right answer. Yeah, thanks everyone. I'll send a follow-up email tomorrow with everyone's contacts so you can stay in touch, get the book, and hopefully come to more events with us online and in person if you're in New York. So see you soon. Take care. Stay safe. Good night.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.